Usually when a good game becomes obscured, it's normally because it didn't sell very well, or the company went under, or it was completely overshadowed by a much bigger game that came out at the time. But sometimes there's a curious exception, a game that got great acclaim, forged its own fans, and setting a great start for a still successful company to this day. Blood is one of those games that checks all those boxes, but since then it's become largely obscured for one reason or another. Yeah, sure, it looks and plays just like Shadow Warrior and Duke Nukem 3D, but that's basically because it was made by 3D Realms, then given over to Monolith to finish, and it runs on the same engine as those other titles. But while they get HD treatment, this amazing game is still running in DOS. Yes, Blood is an awesome, hardcore first-person shooter that is a joy to play whenever you're in the mood for a bloody great time. An emphasis on the blood part. Premise: you're Caleb, a Western gunslinger and devoted follower of the dark god Technobog, or Chenobog, however you pronounce it, who's betrayed and killed, because, I don't know. Anyway, you come back to life somehow, and go on a murderous rampage, killing anyone dumb enough to get between you and your former master. Blood is spread across the 4 usual episodes, each with a variety of insane and creative levels, packed full of monsters, cult members, and other horror tropes. Gameplay is fast-paced and frantic. It's kill or be killed. I would actually go as far to say this game has more action than Duke Nukem and Shadow Warrior combined. Rarely is there a breath between shooting, which is excellent, since you have a wild variety of crazy weapons at your disposal. Initially, you start with a simple but brutal pitchfork, but then you acquire some more inventive weapons, like the flare gun, and a voodoo doll, and a napalm launcher, and a dynamite, that will actually go off if left lighted for too long. Awesome. You do get given more traditional weapons, like the classic shotgun and machine gun. All the weapons function well enough, and most have some sort of drawback or secondary fire. You can fire both barrels of your shotgun for extra damage and spread, and the voodoo doll will actually damage you if used against nothing. But no matter what weapon you use, there's going to be a lot of death and carnage on screen, which is always fun. Though it may seem you have a big advantage over your enemies, you really don't. Initially, you're fighting a simple hooded cult member who wields shotguns and machine guns. They are a pushover on the lower difficulties, but will lie down and even throw explosives on the higher levels. You also got zombies to contend with, that can come back to life if not properly dealt with. Later on, you'll be fighting the Grim Reapers and gargoyles that will fly around you, and Cerebruses that will spew fireballs at you. As it turns out, they're really good at killing you, so it's a damn good thing the gameplay is so smooth. Being able to move her out of harm's way is paramount to living longer than your adversaries. There's very little to fault in the actual challenge of the game. Most of the time it breaks down to skill than anything else. Yeah, you'll get pissed off, but that just makes it all the more satisfying when you kill them. Okay, so it's not all perfect. Enemies with guns have really unfair accuracy, and are able to hit you across the map, which feels a bit cheap. Though you do have an extremely friendly auto aim. To be honest, the hardest part of the game is probably the beginning. You have a very limited supply of weapons and ammo, which is in stark contrast to that of the later levels. There are some serious balancing issues with the more powerful guns. Eventually you'll acquire a Telsa gun, which absolutely obliterates just about every enemy you could ever encounter in only a few shots. What's more is that you're dropped a massive supply of ammo for it whenever you pick it up. You can burn through levels with just the one gun, and just when you think you're running low, it shoves more Telsa ammo in front of you. This isn't a difficulty balancing situation. This happens on normal and harder settings. On the other hand, some weapons like the napalm launcher often are given very little ammo for it, even though you acquire it much earlier than the Telsa gun. So what gives? Now the levels themselves are something else entirely. For one, they're big, varied, and very detailed, and a lot more linear and streamlined. Though it does use the typical key system, only occasionally do you get lost or feel like a rat in a maze. Where there's enemies, there's usually an item you need. It's much faster than something like Doom or even Duke Nukem, which tended to use a more maze-like system. This leads to a much faster progression form that works perfectly with the Speedy gameplay. The actual geometry is a lot more vertical and detailed. Buildings can be scaled and explored, with each room containing some sort of item you can smash or observe. Bottles, books, sinks, stoves, fridges, windows, pantries, storerooms, all of which give a great sense of atmosphere and realism to the environment, which was quite uncommon at the time. It's a big selection of levels, from forests to city blocks to caverns to volcanoes to snow-filled mazes. They can easily change thanks to the destructibility of the build engine, which is used with great effect. Whole buildings crumble and sections of a level can collapse suddenly, which will surprise when they happen. You'll soon probably pick up the theming of the game. While Duke Nukem was based around various movies and action tropes from the 80s and 90s, and Shadow Warrior spoofed cheesy Asian karate films, Blood is full of references and homages to classic horror and thriller films, from Nightmare on Elm Street to The Shining to even Seven, all of which are complemented by Caleb's sadistic and cynical one-liners, are spoken brilliantly, creating a very messed up person. Unfortunately, it's the lack of pacing which hurts Blood the most. Instead of structuring levels in a logical form of progression, like in how Doom, the first episode takes place on Mars and the last episode takes place in Hell, here the levels are just tossed around at random, with a real lack of consistency. The first few levels are the only time you have any sort of this. You start off in a graveyard, then make your way to a train station, then actually catch a train, which is awesome, then crash the bloody thing and explore a nightmarish carnival complete with side attractions. Hell yeah! But in the fourth episode, you start in a medieval castle, then end up in a meat processing plant. The variation is a spice of life, but here they toss it around without any sort of recipe to follow. The most jarring example is the last 3 levels. The third level is amazing. You're fighting hordes of monsters while the environment around you explodes. I love it. But then in the next level, you're walking around an anus, judging by all the fart noises. Serious. There was such a build up for the final boss, then you just shove this crap into me. This really pisses me off, because this is probably the one thing that really holds Blood back from being just as good, if not more, than other shooters of the time, like Quake and Duke Nukem. Yeah, really. But this game is still fantastic to play. I can easily recommend it to any FPS fan that wants to be challenged and blow crap up. Which is kinda like what I say for all my FPS reviews. Huh.